Hello, and welcome to the Building Podcast. The Building Safety Act was the most influential piece of legislation for our industry in a generation. It was a direct consequence of the disastrous fire at Grenfell Tower, where 72 people lost their lives. Now, the Act seeks to change our industry culture, making us more professional with significantly better accountability. Now, one of the key planks of this legislation is to improve the competency in both design and delivery. And the Building Safety Regulator was a post created to help professionals improve their competency. This is now a statutory duty on all employers to demonstrate that competency of their workforce. But the infrastructure to do this is only now being developed. Given how fundamental it is to our sector, I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Faye Burnett to the Building Podcast. Faye is the key driver in this process for our industry. She's the super sector leader for all installation and maintenance activities within the industry and responsible for developing the competency frameworks. She's therefore the ideal person to discuss both the processes we're going through and the cultural change that's happening. Faye, good afternoon.
Hi.
And welcome to the Building Podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, Faye, because industry cultural change is something that we talk about quite regularly on the podcast. And such a fundamental failure as Grenfell Tower, which exposed so many weaknesses within the sector, it is such a, it's such a driver to make these things happen. And having somebody like you who's responsible for demonstrating that competency and making sure that we're all doing what we should do. Not personally, I know you have a large team behind you, but you're the one driving it. I think is really important for people to understand how the industry is going to change and what's involved around it. But before we get into the detail, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've come to land this role? Because I know you've got 2 or 3 different jobs you're trying to fit into all this. And you can explain sort of what your background is for taking this job on.
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for having me. Yeah, there's definitely a huge group of us. There's about 600 people working on the program. So it's definitely not just me. And there's much more competent people in the program than me. But but thank you for having me. Right. So I am a Mace employee, and I've been there for quite some time and spent most of my career in project and program management. That's kind of where my skill set really lies. But recently I have moved into the sustainability part of the business because that is a real passion for me, having delivered quite a few sustainability programs for public sector clients. So I lead the government department group at in the sustainability team, and that's kind of engaging with our government departments on meeting their greening commitments, helping them achieve that. So that's kind of one part of my job. And the other part of my job is where I am the program director for the super sector program, and this is something that we established a couple of years ago. And the idea is it's about a leadership program, a collaboration program, bringing together key players in our industry to focus on the creation of competence frameworks and then rolling those competence frameworks out. So it's really just trying to improve competence in our industry. That's the key kind of focus for the program. On top of that, I also lead the competence work stream for the Construction Leadership Council, something I'm also very proud of. And through that, I'm able to bring kind of wider industry onto our program and help us roll out these kind of implementable actions from the competence framework. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
Brilliant. I mean, many hats and clearly many interrelated hats. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. Perhaps it's just worth talking around about why competence is such an important issue within the sector, because the fire at Grenfell exposed a lot of things, and I think one of the root causes appears to be competency of the people involved. Do you want to just talk about why competence is so important?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think it's important to say that there are a lot of people who really care about the work they do in our industry. When we talk about competence, we don't, we're highlighting a kind of structural issue within our industry, not individuals being kind of rubbish at their job. So this isn't an attack on the individual, but what we are trying to do is look at competence across the board. Where are the kind of key issues? And I think Grenfell really, and Lacknell House and other
Mm.
tragedies before Grenfell highlighted that there are some key issues there, especially in installation and maintenance, especially in kind of that site supervisor role. There were a lot of failings in what happened at Grenfell. But the Building Safety Act, it defines competence for us, the Building Safety Act and regulations. And
Mhm.
it defines competence for the individual as skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors. Competence was always a requirement under the CDM, the Construction Design Management Regs, but they classed it as skills, knowledge, and experience. What the Building Safety Act and the regulations has really cleverly done is added behaviors to the definition of competence for an individual. And what that has done has created a kind of framework or a drive to review what competence, those skills, knowledge, experience, behaviors look like for every single individual. Every individual will have to demonstrate competence, and organizations will have to demonstrate what they call organizational capability. There is a legal requirement for us to do this. We can't hide from it. We have to do it, and
Yeah.
it's really important for our whole industry. We have to be improving competence across the board. We have to do it for the end user, the homeowner, the person living in their house that's falling apart. We have to do this for our whole country, really. It's really important.
I mean, it is. And I think it's fascinating. You've got both the individual competencies that we need to do, but the really important one for me is the organizational competencies,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
those business ones, because the value engineering that was undertaken at Grenfell Tower appears to be one of the root causes, and that's a behavioural failure within the organisations that were asked to do it. And I think it's a fascinating extension of of the requirements from CDM.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is great. So just talk around about what the various groups do with that you're interacting with, and where it fits in,
Mm,
because I think for those of us who are the uninitiated, there's an awful lot of people, you say 600 people all within various departments and structures. How does
mm,
the structure work to be able to impact the man and lady in their vans wondering what's going on and what they've
mhm.
got to do about it?
It can seem quite overwhelming, actually. So it can either seem completely overwhelming with too much information, or it can seem like we're not doing anything. And I want to help kind of fill that gap and explain what we're trying to do and then how it
Mm.
impacts as you say, that the person in the back, in their van going to do their work. So there is a broader picture. So that 600 number is only our program, but there's actually even more work going on. I'd say thousands of people involved in the definition and setting of competence. So there is something called the Industry Competence Steering Group. And this is made up of, I'm just going to look, yep, 15 different categories of everyone working in our industry, right?
Yep.
And what that does is each of those groups look at what competence is or actually what the scope is, who is involved in each of those groups, what competence currently looks like for that group, what competence should look like, and how to fill the gaps. And that is absolutely massive. We've got people from quantity surveyors, building services, we've got project managers, construction professionals. But what I work on is one of the groups, which is called sector-led group 10, and that's where we look at installation and maintenance. And what we've done, really, when you think about these groups, some of these groups have hundreds and thousands of people working in them.
Mm.
But for installation and maintenance, we have millions of people, right? A
Yeah.
real broad spectrum. So our group seems to be the biggest, which is why we have a really lovely support structure from the Industry Competence Steering Group and the Construction Leadership Council. They've all come together. building safety regulator. We've all come together to support the program, but our one, as I said, millions of people are impacted. So we've broken our program down into categories, what we call super sectors, superheroes in my mind. So we've broken it down into
Fair enough.
super sectors, yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea is that we are trying to enable installation and maintenance contractors to own their own competence. So the 5 super sectors we've broken this down into is envelope, engineering, interiors, civil engineering or civil services, and structures. So all of our installers fit within one of those categories. And we have a structure for them and a support system to enable them to set what competence looks like for their occupation.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is, as I said, is to have it under one category. So, or sorry, under one umbrella. So those in site supervisory can link in with installation. So there's a really nice connection between all these groups. It's really a leadership program and a collaboration program. The whole of the ICSG is.
Brilliant. So one of the challenges I think we have then is people who fall within 2 stools or fall between 2 groups. And so understanding how that works, are they going to have to be competent in both sections that you have to be able to deliver that program? Or do they pick one and say, well, I'm going to have some skills elsewhere to be able to deliver this?
It's such a good question, Mark. It's such a good question and something we've really looked at. Look, with Skills England coming in, there are some changes. So there's new things coming out of Skills England and the growth and skills levy that are coming out that I think will impact the answer to that question. There are things like foundation apprenticeship, short form apprenticeships. There are things like short form training courses for those who are already in industry, how to upskill. All of those things are coming out, right? So what we don't want to do is overwhelm the end user so that they now have to do 2 vocational qualifications to become competent. How awful would that be?
Yeah.
Just putting it on the end user. Oh, you've just paid £1,000 for one. Here's another one you have to do. Oh, and a card. No. We don't want to do that. Actually, what we want to do is ensure that those people who are doing the work are competent. So we are looking at that. I don't have an answer for you. What we're actually trying to do is tackle what skills, knowledge, experience, behaviors are initially, and then what's coming out of that is an amalgamation of different end products. So your route to competence might be an apprenticeship in one thing. Oh, and you now want to add on competencies to do another piece of work so that you can take a wall down, you can build a new wall, you can install cupboards, these multiple skills. We're tackling that and we're very much aware of it because it's not just a tier 1 site where one installer does one piece of work. We understand that in the domestic sphere, you will do lots of different types of work. So we're tackling it.
So Catherine, so I mean, really great to hear that you're thinking about micro qualifications and credentials, which is something which I think many of the conversations we've had on this podcast have been. This is how industry is developing because the speed of change is happening faster than people's careers can cope with. So if we're looking at competency of an individual, that could be made up of, as you've just described, the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors, and the experience. And actually, we've got people with different levels of those 4 elements within doing much broadly similar jobs. So one thinks of highly experienced people who don't have so many qualifications, and younger people who might have the qualifications and develop the hard skills to deliver it, but perhaps got the experience to do it. And my question really is understanding how you deal with that within the competency level. If you're saying this is our standard for competency, when you might have varying levels of priorities of those 4 elements within that competency itself. Is the work you're doing understanding that level of sophistication? Absolutely. Or are you just saying this is the answer?
Look, ideally, what you want is a qualified workforce. That's what you want to get to, right? Absolutely want to do that. And that's something we're striving for. You also have to be realistic that some people did their qualification 20 years ago and it might not be the qualification that is required within the competence framework. Or some people have learned through experience and have actually got incredible competence, but don't have the can't demonstrate it in the way that might be established.
Yeah.
We cannot discount a older guy who has been working as a stonemason for 40 years. We absolutely cannot discount that because he may not have a certificate that we've said needs to take place. So absolutely, that's something being looked at. For rain screen as a really good example, rain screen is what burnt at Grenfell. It's the cladding that went on and lit up like a match. So for me, a key priority sector that we needed to kind of focus on. What they've done is set what the competence looks like as the skills, knowledge, experience, behaviors for the installation of rain screen. They've also identified a route to gain competence. But the other thing we've done, which is becoming very common across the groups, is identified short form training to upskill those in industry today.
Yeah.
So that if you are already and have been installing rain screen for several years, you can do these short form training courses to upskill to what baseline competence looks like. Your assessment in order to get your validation of your competence in various methods. For rain screen specifically, it's a CSCS card, right? In order to get that CSCS card, yes, it states you need a vocational qualification. However, if you've done these short form qualifications, these short form training courses, it also gives you that blue skill card.
Right.
So that's the idea, is that there should be multiple routes to competence, and there should be a way that we are helping every one of those end users in all the various forms that they will be to gain the validation of competence.
Brilliant. So actually that you say that experienced worker route is being recognized within the competency
Very much
program.
so.
Because
Very much
they're
so.
absolutely key, aren't they, to train.
Absolutely.
We're going to bring under the younger generation, if nothing else. So that's really pleased you're looking at that.
And we can't just focus on the younger generation. I want to make it clear that younger generation is absolutely important, but it does not mean that they are more important or less important than the people that are currently in industry today. And sometimes I think we forget that. We focus on a route that allows new entrants, and that's really good. We should, but let's not forget those who are already in industry and have made our industry what it is today. They aren't all to blame for what happened at Grenfell. We all have a part to play in it. But there are people out there, if we want our industry to own their competence and improve competence, we also have to acknowledge that they look different, they are different people, and they all have different experience and skills and knowledge and behaviors.
Yeah, and the common theme is the pride in what we do, isn't it?
100%.
Get there and that. So Faye, just talk about then how you're collecting that knowledge, that data, if you like, to be able to populate those knowledge, skills, behaviors, and experience, because you've got 600 people, but we are an industry, as you say, employing millions of people that come under your super sector. Where are you collecting that data from and that knowledge from?
So the trick is to have a whole bunch of people who don't like each other in a room. I say that all the time. We need a consensus view. It can't be one person's idea of what competence looks like for each of those sectors. So we have about 130 different sector groups laid out for installation and maintenance. And behind every single one of those, I think 65 are either launched or finished their competence frameworks or building at the moment. So we're trying our hardest to build as quickly as possible. But behind every single one of those titles, there sits trade association, employer groups, individuals who work in the trade, a real good vast representation of each of the sectors. So it's not one person who might have a financial gain at the end. It's not that. Actually, we make it very clear it needs to be a representation of industry. It's changing all the time. It's never static. It's never perfect. So we like to build our sector groups with proper representation. And sometimes they really don't like each other. And sometimes they disagree what competence looks like. But you know what? That's okay. We want them to disagree, want them to fight. We want them to get to a consensus agreement on what competence looks like, right?
So is this going to be like painting the fourth road bridge? Because as technology changes and as the industry moves and evolves, competency presumably will have to evolve and change with it. So are these groups
Absolutely.
sort of set up indefinitely to review competency on a sort of annual basis, or how do you accommodate that change?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great shout. Great question. So within some of our documentation, I won't go into all the names, within some of the industry specified documentation on competence, it says a review every 5 years. So we have to
Okay.
review what's being created, but also I don't want to make it so structured. You know, if a new trade association becomes a prominent feature in that trade, or a new technology becomes popular and we need to include these competencies, we want it to be adaptable. So our frameworks and our competence groups are quite adaptable. So ideally, we want them stored somewhere that is accessible in a structure that's accessible, which is why we only use Microsoft products to create our documents.
Okay.
We also don't want it in a place that you then have to pay for to access, you know. So it's
Yep.
all about accessibility, and then the ability to refresh the frameworks, to update the frameworks. And also
Brilliant.
acknowledge that nothing's perfect. I think we need
Okay.
to really be realistic about that. These aren't perfect. We're trying our hardest to get to a place of close to perfect, or
Yeah.
inclusion. But yeah, that the idea is that they will be stored on a hub and then updated regularly. But I just want to clarify something, that the frameworks we're creating, we are not creating them for the end user. We are creating them so that they are in the gaps that we've identified and the changes to fill those gaps, they are embedded into the skill system. So that when somebody comes into industry and does an apprenticeship or a vocational qualification
Mhm.
or whatever comes out in the future, these competencies, these skills, knowledge, experience, behaviors are embedded within that system already. So we're not asking somebody who is an installer to now go do additional work. We're saying whatever route you take to gain competence, we want this embedded in there automatically. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. So,
Mm.
the training that's going to be provided, so the industry trainers will need to be cognizant of all the work you're doing to ensure that,
Mm.
if an apprenticeship needs digital skills, for instance, the apprenticeship is changed to include those digital skills. Uh,
That's right.
and if we're picking up the micro qualifications and credentials, that those are new courses that come on to reflect the work that you're doing and those competences that are required. So let's say I'm an electrician coming through. I've done my apprenticeship. I hadn't yet got the experience to do various aspects of a full, on some of the larger commercial projects that we run. But presumably that apprentice has competency to do, or fresh face apprentice has competency to do some work, and they're going to be working towards that competency to do a senior role within the electrical profession. So, do you sort of have way markers along the way about competency? These are the competencies you need to do the first job, and then once you get collected the rest, the next micro qualifications or experience, you're then competent to do the next job.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
that level
exactly
of
that.
detail is there? Brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. Not for all the sector groups, by the way. You know, I'm not talking on behalf of all 130 of them.
Yep.
Some of them, it is what it is. You know, if you're going to install or remove something, and that is the role, that is the occupation, done. But there are something we've kind of broken them down into what we call functions. So
Okay.
you might do one function, and these are the competencies you need. You might do another function, these are the competencies you need.
Brilliant.
But so yeah, behind all of this is a structure, and I'm not sure how many of your listeners will know this, because I didn't know it as
Right.
a project and program manager, quite looking into an organization instead of out to industry. There is a whole huge structure sitting behind us. Obviously, educational structures, a lot of us are aware of them, but there are routes and structures set out in order to roll out training, provision, that kind of stuff. There's standard setting bodies that this is their job to do the stuff. We have on our program ensured that we are aligned and engaging with that structure. So all the key players within that structure sit within our program as a support function. They
Brilliant.
don't
Okay.
guide us, they don't
Yep.
tell us what to do, and I'm very clear about that. They are there to support us when we identify what competence looks like. The regulator has made it the building safety regulator has made it very clear that industry needs to own their own competence. And that's what we're doing with this. So when I say stuff like a standard setting body comes into support, that is exactly what they do. So it's we've established a structure that I think works for industry.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Faye, one of the things that really interests me is what the man in the street, the lady in the street is going to be doing with this information. And we're going to say this is the competency level you need to do your job.
Mm.
And yet it's the ultimate arbiter actually in the initial phase is the employer, isn't it? The employer's got to decide and demonstrate that's competence. Is an employer going to have to stick rigidly to the work you've done, or have they got some license to say, yes, well, I think this person's competent, even though they've got different competencies to that that's described within the work that you're doing?
I mean, an employer and a contractor needs to have a statement of competence in order to receive building control sign-off.
They do.
On higher risk building, that forms part of the new gateways that have been established.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's the answer to that is they need to be able to state that they believe those working on their projects are competent, and how best to do that than to link into the competence frameworks that are already established.
Fine.
So I've been hearing quite a lot recently that our industry competence steering groups are another competence group. We are not another competence group. We are the competence group, because we are a working group under the Industry Competence Committee that is set up under the Act, and we report into the building safety regulator. So we are not another group that might be looking at competence. We are the group, and employers need to feel confident that they can write their statement of competence, right? And how do they do that? Well, they need to know that when somebody has gone through this qualification, when they can demonstrate that they have experience, when they can demonstrate that all their competencies are in place, then they are competent, because it's not just about a qualification, right? Competency isn't just a qualification.
No.
So we are trying to help the employer as one of the end users to be able to confidently say that they are competent.
Brilliant. So I mean that's that's going to give us all a really good guide on what we need to do to be able to demonstrate competency in the industry. And that's I can see my PDRs getting really quite prescriptive that this is how we're going to have to progress to get competent people on the ground to do the work that we currently employ them for. That's going to be quite an interesting but very clear route forward for everybody in the sector to make sure they are competent. And so you'd be urging everybody to look at these frameworks and saying, well, this is what I need to be able to do the job for which I think I'm hopefully paid for.
Especially the route to competence, because again, we don't want an end user, like an individual, to pick it up and go, these are the competencies I need. How do I find them? That's quite a difficult job. Actually, we want it embedded into the skill system, into that structure. Ideally, my end vision for this would be a competence hub where an individual could say, I want to be a carpenter, and then can click and go, right, give me a competence, my own competence passport scheme or whatever. And they can say, right, do I have these competencies? Where did I get? Oh, I got it in my apprenticeship. Okay, I'm good. What's missing? Oh, look, there's additional competencies I need. How do I get them? And ideally, we want to give them that. Oh, I need a CSCS card to work on these sites. Cool, let's go get a CSCS card. I'd love for that to be in place. And a review was done recently, and a industry-wide competence passport scheme was suggested as one of those recommendations, which the Department of Education has agreed to.
They have, yes.
And as we, as sector-led Group 10, have very strong links with the Department of Education, especially those who are moving to Skills England, that is something we're already talking to them about. Whatever comes out of this industry-wide competence passport scheme, hub, whatever you want to call it, It needs to use the existing structures that are there already, not create a new one. It needs to be easy to use for the end user, and that can be an installer, an organization,
Yep.
you know, a contractor. All of that needs to be established so that if we make it too difficult, people won't use it.
Yeah.
And we're not improving competence.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed.
And that won't be a competency card, will it? It'll actually just record the information that's somebody, because it'll depend what the jobs they're meant to be doing to be able to say whether they're competent or not. They're really
You
good.
don't want to get rid of some good structures. So if there is
Yeah.
a competence, well, no, let's call it a skills card rather than a competence card, because they don't demonstrate competence, right? So if there is a
ability card.
There we go. If there's a validation card out there, let's use it. Let's not destroy it. You know, my end goal is not to destroy these incredible systems and structures that have been worked on before. Actually, it's bringing it together to make the experience for the end user easier.
Yes, and if it's not easy, it won't get used. If it's not used, we're wasting our time, aren't we?
Yeah.
And there's
What's the point of all this amazing work? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Faye, talk to me about timescales then, because the Act came into full force April last year. We have a statutory requirement to demonstrate competence today, and we have the old ways of doing that, and we don't have the standards and the frameworks yet that you're developing. Do you have a sort of an aspiration for the timescale for herding your 600 cats into position to deliver to deliver the frameworks that you've got?
Well, let's take it one step higher. Let's talk about the Industry Competence Steering Group and all of the competencies rather than just installers. We're all working incredibly hard to get it done now, really. We're moving really quickly. There are some really good documents out already. So I've set up a CLC page with all of this on, and I'll give it to you for your notes. But on there, a lot of the completed competence frameworks are on that page already. The project management one is incredible. So as a really simple example, with the project management one, what Mace did was we looked at it, we looked at our own frameworks in-house, and we went, right, where are the gaps? Luckily, there weren't that many gaps. Mace were pretty on it. But what we then did was said, right, let's align the wording so that it links up. And we've started doing that in-house now. So a lot of really good work is already out there, and people can go and get it in the CLC link. In terms of timescales, I can't really tell you. We want to move as quickly as possible, but a lot of these sectors have some real issues to tackle. You know, if you are a sector group like thermal insulation or asbestos, who have really good structures already in place, and there's lots of them, just because I didn't mention them doesn't mean they're rubbish. Then you know, I think thermal insulation were pretty much converted into our framework in a month, because they had such great stuff already established. You know, others are taking 2 years. No names, because I don't want to get them into trouble, but one of the sector groups, we're into the 3rd year. This is the 3rd year, and we still don't have an agreement. And why? Because across the country, there is disconnects between associations, between skills bodies, blah, blah, blah. That, bringing it together, is going to take time. In the meantime, there are really, really good structures in place. So if somebody is confused, what do I do today? Have a look at the CLC webpage. If the framework's on up there, contact your organization. So if it's project management, contact the Association of Project Management, CIOB, RICS, whatever. Contact your trade association if you're in trade, and find out what they have already. And as long as you are aligning to industry best practice, whether it is established now or whether it will be improved in the future, then you're okay. You're okay. It's the rogue agents, the ones who go, I don't need to know what competence looks like because my dad taught me, or I don't need to do a qualification because I already know everything I need to know. Those are the people that we're the most worried about. And really, these are the ones who need to be checking in.
Brilliant. And that brings me on to my next question, Faye, really very effectively, because one of the groups of people I think you've just very well described are actually most of the board of directors of companies running companies in the construction industry. So given the requirement for organizational responsibility, I see a notable lack on your website of directors. and there's no
Yeah.
competency or experience required of directors. And it always fascinates me that we've removed grandfather rights throughout the industry, with the one exception being a board of directors, where you might argue it's the most fundamental position in an industry, in a company, to be able to identify the direction and the competency and everything else within that company. Is that an area you think we ought to be focusing in on, or working,
Absolutely.
getting
No
to
one's
getting to grips
exempt.
with?
No one's exempt. We all have a part to play. But
Brilliant,
I do believe the Industry Competence Steering Group might be tackling that. If I'm if
brilliant.
I'm if I'm honest, for the purposes of my work, we really are focusing on
Yeah, no,
the
no.
installer. We're
Yeah,
looking at what others believe is the bottom of the ladder. I don't think that. I think installers play a huge part and are really, really important in this whole process. So we focus on installers. But I do believe board of directors and executive roles are being looked at across the board. So I think the Industry Competence Steering Group is capturing that.
brilliant, brilliant. Faye, we've had a really good explanation from you from what's going on, and really the importance of it as well, and the fundamental requirement. I think everybody's going to be affected by your work. As you say,
Mm,
millions of people are going to have an ability now to determine whether they're competent or not, and what they're going to have to do to be able to get competent. Hopefully, we'll never see another accident once we're up and running that's actually created this. We won't be killing 72 people entirely erroneously. I was going to sort of, my last question really for you was just sort of, is there any message you'd like to get out to the sort of people who might be listening to the podcast, or sort of a call to arms to get engaged,
mm,
or have a look what's going on, or whatever it might be, get competent might be might be the most
mm.
fundamental one. But I don't know, what would you like people to be doing in the industry, given this sort of goes out to a fairly broad cross section of the sector?
Yeah, I think, look, there's actually two elements. So the first one is we've got some incredible leaders on our program. We really do. We have industry leaders, but we also have up and coming leaders. We've got people who might, in a broader perspective, be missed, but in their sector are doing some incredible work, which we're learning from. We need more help. We need
Okay.
sectors to get involved. Last week, I had a group of people from chimney installation come and speak to us, and I love that. I want that. I want you to come and talk to us. I want you to get involved in the program, come and improve competence for your sector group, or show us that competence is spot on and you don't need any help. That's fine too. So we definitely need people to come get involved in the program. The bigger, the better, the more industry representation. But most certainly from an individual perspective, I want people to prioritize competence. I want them to look at their own work, their own competencies, and be honest with themselves, because you can have such a long career and great experience and have done so many courses and have such great skills and knowledge. But if your behaviors aren't right, you are not competent. And if your behaviors are poor, then you are part of the problem. But you might have brilliant behaviors and a lot of experience, but maybe you need a little bit of work on your skills. Just look at your own competence and try to figure out how best to improve what you do, because you are an important piece of this whole puzzle. So from an individual perspective, own your own competence, you know?
Brilliant. Yeah, yeah. No, brilliant. And this information is published on the Construction Leadership Council website. It's
That's right.
available for everybody to look at and see what's going on.
Yeah.
And where there are gaps in your teams, they're also published. So I'm aware that we're playing catch up on the solar sector, for instance,
Yeah.
and we're trying to get that into place for you to start adding to your group's work as fast as we can. But that information is
That's right.
all available on the CLC website, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send you the link. We can put it in the notes.
Brilliant, brilliant. Faye, it's been a really fascinating conversation. I'm just so pleased that we've got somebody with your enthusiasm and passion and drive to make this happen. It's
Thank you.
such a key thing to get right. And I've personally got a lot of confidence we're going to get there very rapidly with something that's going to be usable with the industry. And would thank you very much for all your work and wish you luck in getting to the end of it as soon as you possibly can. But thank you for your
Thank you.
contribution to the Building Podcast.
And thanks for having me. Thank you, Mark.